watching News Epicenter with me, Maria Shakil. A storm has erupted across the country over BBC documentary on 2002 Gujarat Riots. The government of India had earlier directed Twitter and YouTube to block links of this documentary. The opposition parties lashed out at the government and termed that move as censorship. While commenting on the issue, Congress MP Rahul Gandhi took a jibe at centre and said that truth has a nasty habit of coming out. Not only this, the screening of BBC documentary was held at universities in 3 cities in India. Union Minister Kiren Rijiju slammed the opposition and asked them to get over colonial intoxication. Even senior Congress leader A.K. Antony's son, Anil Antony, asked people to not support the documentary as it would set a dangerous precedent. The US State Department today said they are not familiar with the BBC documentary, but they are very familiar with the shared values that enact the US and India as two thriving and vibrant democracies. Amidst all this, Britain's public appointments watchdog will investigate the election of BBC chairman Richard Sharp, following concerns over his role in helping former Prime Minister Boris Johnson secure a loan. According to reports, BBC chairman Richard Sharp was linked with helping Boris Johnson in securing a loan of up to £800,000. British MP Lord Popat wrote to BBC Today expressing dissatisfaction over the documentary. He argues that such unsubstantiated claims can cause harm to the reputation of a democratically elected leader and can also incite discord within a multicultural British society. The BBC documentary surely raises questions about intent and timing. So the big question which arises here is, are opposition parties in India clearly falling into the West trap?
डॉक्यूमेंट्री जो है कहीं भी लीगली जो है बतौर लीगल कानूनी रूप से वो बैन नहीं है भारत में, तो उसे देखना कोई गुनाह नहीं है।
बीजेपी नेताओं को बात देखते हैं। You can ban, you can suppress the press, you can use CBI, ED, all this stuff. But the truth is the truth. It has a nasty habit of coming out.
ये गंभीर विषय है।
So the question is, a documentary which is on falsehood, which doesn't really believe in the verdict of the law of the land, that the Supreme Court of India had given a clean chit to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, why should that documentary be screened in India at all? And can the opposition keep on repeating the same old logic that this is about truth when it is far, far away from truth? So what are the options before the government of India? And will this be some kind of reaction that will come? Remember, the Ministry of External Affairs has responded. The British Prime Minister has spoken as well. What is the government of India's plan of action going to be? We are being joined by Kanchan Gupta, Senior Advisor, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. Mr. Gupta, really appreciate your time, sir. BBC Chairman Richard Sharp's appointment is now under the scanner because of the recent scandal related to Boris Johnson. Mr. Gupta, does it reflect on the functioning of the BBC, and will it strengthen India's case against its biases?
Well, the appointment of the British public broadcaster's chairman is actually mired in very deep controversy. What has appeared in the British media, including the Times, says that he arranged for an £800,000 loan for Boris Johnson while Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. And there were no disclosures. There are mandatory disclosures that have to be made under British law. and neither Boris Johnson nor the putative chairman made those disclosures, and the appointment went through. So it is basically, it just shows the level of amorality that that seeps through BBC from the top to the bottom.
You have talked about an interesting point there, but we have raised questions on BBC. In fact, there is a letter that has been written to Tim Davie, who is the Director General of BBC, by Lord Dollar Popat, and he has raised concerns about this documentary. But Mr. Gupta, it seems that as far as India is concerned, there are takers for this documentary, and there have been efforts made to screen this documentary in several campuses as well. So what is the government planning to do on that front?
Well, if somebody wishes to act against the national interest, if there are people who are delighted that a foreign organization questions the authority, the sovereignty, the credibility of the Indian justice system, if they are happy to propagate that the Supreme Court of India is not to be trusted, but a foreign organization is to be trusted, there is really little that can be done to sort of, contain this kind of thinking. We have always had this problem. So this is not something new. I think, you see, there were collaborators during the freedom struggle who were working against the independence of India. And many of them were from the left. Many of the collaborators were from the left. There is a famous book that was written, Jewel in the Crown.
That's right.
It was about a mole in the leftist movement who was collaborating with the British government those days. So I am not particularly perturbed about what a minuscule section of India's vast population thinks. But what worries me is that something like this should have at all happened, because it brings into question the very credibility of the public broadcasting system globally.
Yes. So since you have raised that valid question about, credibility of BBC in particular right now, the question is that this was raised in the UK Parliament. The Prime Minister has responded that it doesn't reflect the larger view of the government. But if the documentary is still continuing to be online as far as the BBC YouTube channel and other social media platforms are concerned, and they'll be airing the second part as well, then what does it mean? I mean, despite India's protest, despite protests coming in from several quarters, if the BBC is continuing, how will the government of India plan to, perhaps stop it or take it up in is there any other way that you can take this issue up?
Well, there are several parts to your question. As far as the first part of the so-called quote-unquote documentary, it's a misnomer, because a documentary, the word documentary, rests on documentation. And this is something which has no documentation. It is a fabrication. The first part, when it was aired, the content, it was not aired in India.
Yes.
It was aired on channel BBC Two.
Yes.
And people in India did not have access to it when it was telecast. But subsequently, the content appeared on YouTube and other intermediaries. And the government of India, invoking emergency powers under Rule 16 of the IT Rules 2021, has blocked access to that content. across platforms. If despite that, some people continue to amplify or propagate or distribute that content, then I mean, what really can you do? I mean, you can't do anything on that front because this is not banned; it is blocked. The second part is airing tonight, or I think it has already aired. It was supposed to air at around 9 p.m. tonight. Once the contents are scrutinized, subsequent action will be taken.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Kanchan Gupta, there, Senior Advisor of the Ministry of INB Ministry. Joining me now, Tuhin Sinha, BJP spokesperson, Lokesh Jindal, Congress spokesperson, Ishkaran Bhandari, lawyer, Kuldeep Singh Shekhawat is director of MATV. We also have Anil Trigunayath, former diplomat and one of the signatory against this documentary. Ambassador Trigunath, I'm going to come to you first. You have been one of the signatories of this open letter. You're calling it rightly that this is factually incorrect. But as far as, despite that, and there have been attempts to sensationalize and politicize the matter, which is completely, if this documentary, if it's a work of fiction rather than truth, then, despite this letter, it doesn't seem like that this entire controversy is ending here in India. Why do you think there are efforts being made to broadcast this or organize screening of this movie in campuses in India? How damaging is it for India to have that kind of a conversation of this nature at all now?
Well, Maria, in a democracy, there are people who have all kinds of views. And when the sensibility across the board does not prevail, then you have these kind of issues coming up. And so there are certain campuses, including my own previous campus. I'm an ex-JNUite, and I heard about it, that they want to continue to show this. Now, what is it going to come out of it? Frankly, the fact remains is we are not looking at something that just it's against one person of Prime Minister Modi. It is against India.
That's right.
It casts aspersions on India's judicial system.
That's right.
It casts aspersions of India being the largest democracy. It casts aspersions and tries to undermine that India today has reached the heights and has surpassed UK itself. And BBC has always been, or for that matter, the whole of Western media, has always been subjective and negative about India. And we have dealt with it for a very long time. Now, the fact remains is that the BBC is doing it on its own or at the behest of somebody, because we know in these countries, whether it is US, whether it is UK, a lot of lobbying system operates. So if you come to think of it, just a few months ago, and the Pakistani foreign minister had used very similar kind of a language against Prime Minister Modi. And this is something has been also taken in the media, and you are in the media, and we have handled as diplomats the media everywhere. So I know that these things continue to work, and they create.
But then how can India counter it? No, because you have made a valid point. I mean, this is similar to what Bilawal Bhutto said, and that's a matter of huge concern. I mean, how will India counter this? Because there's a second part of the documentary has also come out.
Well, now, like BBC is hell-bent on it. We have taken it up. I'm sure the government of India has taken it up with the British government. Prime Minister Sunak himself has clearly said that he does not agree with the characterization. They could have perhaps taken a little more action to prevent it, because after all, anything said about their queen or king is not allowed to be shown on their own channels or the TV. There is a certain
yes, that's right. I mean, we know what really happened. I mean, in the context of Harry and Meghan, those series and the book has exposed the British press completely. Before I bring in the politicians, I want to understand from you, Ishkaran Bhandari, legally, what are the options to ensure that this film is not screened on campuses in India?
Maria, firstly, I would like to say one thing. Everybody understands BBC is doing a propaganda piece. There is a school of journalism, especially abroad, whether it be New York Times, and I recently saw an article on the lighter side by a food critic in New York Times, which goes like, India is currently struggling with a powerful wave of Hindu nationalism that threatens its Muslim population with deadly violence. This news is hard to ignore even in a food story. He was asked to give 10 recipes on food, and he talks about Prime Minister Modi and how that is making a food story difficult, and the editors of New York Times publish this story. So there is a very, very clear bias. I think they will blame Prime Minister Modi for a bad egg curry because the story was about an egg curry and how BJP's nationalism is destroying the egg curry's recipe and across India food recipes. So when people have stooped to that level of ridiculousness, and they stand exposed, and there is no significance to them. The investigative agencies in India, and let's be clear, 2004 to 2014, wasn't BJP government in power. When the Supreme Court has already ruled, then all they should be dismissed. Now BJP has gone in a different route. They have seemed to have blocked it, and they have the powers to block it. But I think things like this should best be ignored because they have no significance. If you focus on that, then it's the Streisand effect, where a photograph downloaded only 4 times became downloaded 4 lakh times. So for me, as a free speechist, I think propaganda pieces can be answered or countered by a further documentary on any subject, or to be ignored. By blocking in today's social media world is extremely, extremely difficult, as anybody who understands digital technology knows.
Is this some, you understand, nobody knew about this BBC documentary till the time it was brought to public notice through this blocking that has happened on YouTube.
Well, good evening, Maria. Maria, this is a transformed nation. We don't have the time or the patience to once again be dragged into a nefarious agenda which has been thwarted and defeated by the topmost courts of the country time and again. Please try to understand very clearly. This entire video, this entire documentary had a threefold agenda. Number one, to foment communal trouble in the country. We all, let me reiterate on your show that 25% of those dead in the riots, in the unfortunate riots, were Hindus. But very clearly from the portions that I saw of the documentary, there was an intent to foment communal trouble. Number two, there was an attempt to cast aspersions on the judicial system of the country. And number three, there was to create a wedge between India and UK, particularly at this point of time when we are at a brilliant juncture of an equation and would be potentially signing the FTA. So the target was as much Rishi Sunak as it was Narendra Modi ji. And I think, given the complexities, we were within our rights to take a decision. It was Indira Gandhi who had banned BBC for 2 years. So BBC has a history of perfidy. BBC has a history of denigrating the reputation of the country. But more importantly, I'm particularly appalled by the alacrity of the student wings of the Congress and the left parties to go ahead with the screening of these in their campuses. And that is where I think we need to delve deeper into the possible role of some Indian entity in the whole thing, because we should remember that in May last year, there was somebody who went to London and went about saying that kerosene has been spread everywhere and India is about to burn. I think, this BBC could have led to that, this BBC documentary.
Okay. Lokesh, if Indira Gandhi blogged BBC in India, understanding fully well that it has its biases, then why is the Congress party adding fuel to fire? The question here is that, do you believe more in the Supreme Court of India, which said clearly that in the name of plea, the appellant was also indirectly questioning the decisions or rendered by the courts in other matters, including, the point here was that it was dismissed, clearly saying that that Jaffrey's petition was motivated and prompted by directions from some others. If you look at some parts in the documentary, it talks about, some factually incorrect parts, clearly talking about the Supreme Court had rejected Babu Bajrangi's sting as legally untenable. It has been used in the documentary. So if anything, this is a propaganda piece. Then why is the Congress party keen on screening this piece?
Yes, good evening. See, when we talk about issues like this, there is a higher court beyond all institutions, that is history. Now, in history, we have seen certain parallels like this. We know the famous Hussain Shahid Suhrawardi, the Chief Minister of Bengal, during whose tenure the great Calcutta killings occurred. So for the Indians, he is the great Calcutta butcher. during whose regime, who was the CM, there were mass killings happening and ultimately the country going into partition. I mean, there would be lots of institutions who would be giving him a clean chit, but
Supreme
again,
Court.
he remains a butcher.
And this is a Supreme Court monitored special investigation team which had questioned Mr. Modi for hours when he was the chief minister.
No, I'll correct it. The special investigation team which was constituted, even there were various lapses that had been pointed out by Kapil Sibbalji.
No, but it is the Supreme Court which finally said that what was done was malicious. That he had rejected the testimonies of several officers, clearly saying that it doesn't really hold because they were acting at somebody's behest. Do we go with one lawyer's argument or should we believe in the law of the land, the final verdict of the Supreme Court?
Let me answer. Gujarat was already having necessary and sufficient conditions for communal violence in February 2002. The Kar Sevaks attacks were being, Kar Sevaks and the hostilities with the Muslims, it was being reported in the newspapers. But the point is the government could have intervened, it could have acted proactively, it could have diffused tension. I mean, the very place where the train was burnt, just 5 minutes away.
I'm trying to understand when the Supreme Court, after years of investigation, has given a clean chit to someone, why should your political party not believe it? When it was the UPA which was in power then, it was not the NDA. It was not the BJP government.
No, Supreme Court has observed that any form of a claim that there was a direct contact between the government and that violence was something unfound for. But there is always a connect and there is an inactivity by the government which led to these
452-page judgment of the Supreme Court of India clearly talks about how all these revelations that were made by police officers like Sanjeev Bhatt and others was ultra-sensational revelations and, in the words of the court, sensationalize and politicize the matters in issue, completely replete with falsehood. Should we go with this or believe what the BBC is saying? Because BBC's version is what Tehelka said and Tehelka in itself had to back off after that.
So I would say over here, the government, why is it so much concerned? Chor ki daadi mein tinka. If it is so confident with all its facts, with everything, when it is so much proper in its conduct, what is it?
Okay, Tuhin Sinha will respond. Tuhin Sinha will respond and then I'll bring in Ishkaran Bhandari. Yeah.
So-called complicity of the government, which the Congress is talking about, is clearly a hallucination of their toxic mind. Because as you have mentioned, the 452-page judgment of the Supreme Court does not, has completely exonerated the government of any connect, of any involvement, of a. So I think it's a complete and mind you, the 9 years of investigation was the most hostile investigation which any CM could face in India's history, which is a proven fact. You have visuals of how he was investigated by CBI for 9 hours non-stop. And look at how Rahul Gandhi behaved when he was called for by ED for investigation. So I think, the Congress needs to grow out of this. But again, I want
with that of someone.
Please, I didn't interfere when we were talking. On 6th August 2004, a UPA government had banned a similar film on Gujarat called Final Solution for the same reasons. And the film could have led to communal trouble. So I think, what is the Congress talking? They should desist from flogging a dead horse.
I would like to answer.
Yes, Lukesh, quickly.
See, Final Solution that was being censored by the Congress in 2004 was in order to prevent any form of a communal unrest. But this particular government, rather than banning Kashmir Files, which had a similar content, it promoted Kashmir Files. Tax soaps were given, government employees were given holidays, the government went out to support a commercial movie without even realizing that it is demonizing one entire community who are Indian citizens.
Okay.
So this particular narrative that the government is planning a particular documentary because it can bring about a social unrest, it is not standing credible at all. I mean, there's a
dichotomy, quickly and then I'll bring in others.
That government has.
I'll tell you why Kashmir Files was important and why the case is completely different. It is different because Yasin Malik the main butcher, the main protagonist, the main antagonist of the Kashmir, the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus, was his crimes were whitewashed for 10 years by the UPA regime. He went about hobnobbing with the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and that is why, for a final closure, it was important. But the case over here is very different. For 20 years, the Congress has gone about town spreading malafide falsehood about Gujarat. They have not succeeded. One of the last judgments, the most recent judgments was again of the Supreme Court, was against Teesta Setalwad, casting aspersions on her intent. So I think the Congress should at least read the judgments properly before.
Yes. Kuldeep Singh Shekhawat is director of MATV and he is joining me as well. Mr. Shekhawat, how is the Indian community taking this? We believe there were certain protests that were held as well.
See, Indian community has taken it like a big blow. First of all, they don't believe Prime Minister Modi has done something like this. According to them, Prime Minister Modi did whatever best he could do, and mind you, we have around 800,000 Gujaratis living in UK, and they are part of the team that must have been there. Some of them must have been there in Gujarat during those riots. First of all, why BBC has to come out with this documentary in the first place?
Yes.
There was no need to raise this kind of scenario at this junction. But I feel it's a Labour scenario because BBC is pro-Labour and the Labour government did inquire about this documentary and they had a team of people who went down to Gujarat and they did some survey and all that stuff. So it seems like a Labour script which is being written to put down Prime Minister Modi and this FTA which is happening between Conservative Party and Government of India. So it smells of something which sinister. It's a sinister motive which is taking place between Labour Party and BBC.
This is similar to what Tuhin was pointing out. This is similar to what Tuhin Sinha just said. Ambassador Trigunayat, if there is a larger conspiracy and if it is domestic politics which has led to something which can have an impact on diplomatic relations between the two countries, then it is the UK Premier who should be ordering an investigation into this.
Well, I hope he does, but as was mentioned, I think by someone here in the panel, that I think Kanchan mentioned it, that it is also possibly targeted against him as well. This is and Hussain, the Pakistani origin MP, actually questioned him about this. So I have a different theory. It's not proven, and I don't know. I mean, these kind of things happen. It is also possibly a Pakistan lobby that has been working there because, see, the UK generally, as I said earlier, that India has just left them behind to be the fifth largest economy. There's the G20 everywhere India has helped under Prime Minister Modi. So that is not palatable to the West at all. And we know that it is not only here. Now you'll be seeing some other countries will also come out with certain other incendiary messages about India pertaining to human rights or this and that, making something out just to embarrass.
The fact is that this is malicious in nature. And if anything, the political class in India should be outrightly rejecting it and speaking in one voice, rather than this conflict that we are seeing between various political parties. It's not about ideological differences here. It has more ramifications. And Ishkaran, you get the final word. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I would just simply say the final word belongs to the Supreme Court of India, which went into this in depth and held that there was nothing to be found. And please remember, 2004 to 14, the most hostile government with target number one was Chief Minister of Gujarat. They could find nothing. And lastly, I would say only this. If Congress wants to do it, BJP should be happy. I think banning it was silly. But if Congress wants to show it, BJP should be happy. They tried to doubt Election Commission. They tried to doubt the army recently. And they doubt the Supreme Court. And the people have answered that. So nothing much to be done about it.
All right. Thank you so much to Tuhin Sinha, Lokesh Jindal, Ishkaran Bhandari, Ambassador Trigunayat and Kuldeep Singh Shekhawat. We are shifting focus.